Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm talking about the 2026 Georgia governor's race and a very interesting development here as the former Republican Lieutenant Governor Geoff Duncan is weighing whether to run for governor as a Democrat in the state of Georgia. If you're unfamiliar with the name Geoff Duncan, you may remember some of the fallout of the 2020 presidential election with President Trump with the state of Georgia with Brian Kemp, with Lieutenant Governor Geoff Duncan, and how that all unfolded. There are other videos on YouTube and other websites online that can explain it much better than I could, but essentially there was a massive falling out between President Trump and Governor Kemp and the Lieutenant Governor Duncan and the Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And President Trump went after all three of them, attempting to primary all three. The only one that President Trump was successful in getting rid of, essentially, was Geoff Duncan. Now, Geoff Duncan, however, the former Republican lieutenant governor, in that article that I just showed you at the beginning, is now reportedly considering running for governor of Georgia as a Democrat. So this is very interesting because Duncan, being a former Republican, certainly has a vendetta of sorts against the Republican Party and against President Trump and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party specifically, which would probably making him express interest in wanting to run for this race as a Democrat. However, Georgia is expected to be a very close race in 2026. Would the Democratic voters in a Democratic primary vote for a former Republican to lead them in a state like Georgia, which, no offense to, for instance, the state of Florida, where a former Republican is running for governor there as a Democrat? Florida, the chances of a Democrat getting elected governor are a lot less than they are in Georgia. So I'm not sure the Democrats in Georgia go down this route, but it could be something very interesting to monitor. The governor's race in Georgia right now has 4 Democrats running in: Oljumi Brown, a church founder; Jason Estevez, a state senator; Derek Jackson, a state representative; and the most highly well-known, Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is the former mayor of Atlanta from 2018 to 2022. She's currently the most well-known candidate running. However, a handful of other Democrats have expressed interest, including Mike Thurmond, the former DeKalb County CEO, Lucy McBath, the U.S. representative from the 6th District. Now Geoff Duncan throws his name into the list as a potential candidate. But all eyes are on Stacey Abrams, the former Democratic nominee for governor in 2018 and 2022. And I'll be getting into the election results of Georgia in just a second. But as for the Democratic primary, it's very likely if Geoff Duncan does decide to run, he's going to be going up against, at very least, Keisha Lance Bottoms and possibly Stacey Abrams. Duncan's chances at winning that primary would not start out very high. Now, Geoff Duncan, if he got to the general election, it's possible, being a former Republican, that if there are some Republicans in Georgia who are dissatisfied with the president, I don't think there's still a large number of them, but if there are any, he may be able to get some of those Republicans. Would the Democrats throw all their weight behind Geoff Duncan the same way they would, for instance, with Keisha Lance Bottoms or Stacey Abrams? That's where I question the electability aspect of Geoff Duncan. He's someone that if he got to the general election, things could be very interesting. It'd be a very interesting case study to see how he would do, but I don't know if he would get the full support of the National Democratic Party like the same way as Stacey Abrams or Keisha Lance Bottoms would. Now, it is also worth noting the Republican side of things is pretty interesting as well. Right now, Chris Carr, the Attorney General of Georgia, is the only declared Republican in this race. 2 other Republicans have expressed interest, though: Marjorie Taylor Greene and Burt Jones, Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. It's anyone's guess if they are going to run, but right now Chris Carr is the presumptive Republican nominee. He's much more in the Brian Kemp mold of a Republican than in the Donald Trump mold, which in the state of Georgia probably gives Chris Carr a better chance at winning a general election. And if he were to face off against someone like Geoff Duncan, Carr would probably have an easier time at defending a lot of the claims and statements that Duncan would make than someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene that's more aligned very closely with President Trump. Another X-Factor candidate here is the Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He's listed as a potential candidate for both Senate and governor. He has not officially said if he's going to run for them or if he's going to run at all for either position in 2026, but he's someone, again, with very close ties to Governor Kemp that could be a very formidable Republican candidate in the general election. The question would be, would Raffensperger get through the Republican primary, again, given everything surrounding the 2020 presidential election? That remains to be seen. But the Republican primary, for now, until otherwise, I would say starts out with Chris Carr as the favorite. The Democratic side is completely wide open. Geoff Duncan's name being in this mix would be very interesting, but I'm not sure he would start out as the likely Democratic nominee at this time. As for the Democratic primary, only one poll was taken from back in September of 2023, but it clearly shows Stacey Abrams had a large lead over the Democratic Party at that time in that race. This election is going to be very close. Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Race to the White House, and Sabado Crystal Ball, 4 highly respected political prediction websites. 3 out of the 4 have it listed as a toss-up. Sabado Crystal Ball has it listed as lean Republican. And if you've been following the state of Georgia, you really know why. Georgia's been one of the closest states in American politics in the last few years. At the governor level, though, it's actually been more Republican than it has been at the national level. Brian Kemp won re-election for governor by 7.5% against Stacey Abrams in 2022. Kemp getting about 2.1 million votes, Abrams getting about 1.8 million, roughly around 300,000 votes. Separating them, this was a very good performance and very big win for Brian Kemp. After 4 years before that, in 2018, Kemp and Abrams had one of the closest races in the United States in this election. Kemp won by 1.4% against Stacey Abrams. Kemp getting 1,978,408 votes. Abrams here got 1,923,685. So roughly only about 50,000 votes or so, about 54,000 votes separating Kemp and Abrams in this very close race in Georgia. So re-election, Kemp did very well, but the first time around, he got elected by a very narrow margin, and that's something the Democrats are going to be looking to go after in 2026, is a race more likely to be like 2018, which also was a very strong year for the Democrats. That's more likely to be what the governor's race will look like in 2026 than when Kemp won re-election by 7.5% in 2022. So that's at the governor level. At the Senate level, Georgia's actually been a little bit of a different case. In 2022, Democrat Raphael Warnock won re-election against Republican Herschel Walker by about 2.8%. That would be a lean Democratic win for the Democrats. And then back in 2020, this is when the runoff election, because neither Republican nor Democratic candidate broke 50% of the vote on Election Day, it went to a runoff on, I believe, January 3rd, and it showed Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock both winning their respective races by a lean Democratic margin. Ossoff defeated Republican David Perdue by 1.2%. Warnock defeated Republican Kelly Loeffler by 2.1%. So the last 2 elections at the Senate level have both been lean Democratic. The presidential level, it's been both. President Trump flipped Georgia in 2024, winning it by 2.2% against Kamala Harris, though it is worth noting when you compare how a lot of states shifted across the country, pretty much everywhere shifted towards the Republicans, Georgia actually only shifted by not that much. Trump ended up winning Georgia by 2.4%, or shifted towards Trump by 2.4%. That was one of the smaller shifts compared to a lot of other states and a lot of other swing states. Nevada shifted by 5.5%, Arizona 5.5%, North Carolina about 1.9%, Wisconsin 1.5%, Michigan 4.2%, Pennsylvania 2.9%. Georgia was in the bottom half of the toss-up states in terms of how much it shifted to the Republicans, and that's something Democrats are looking to capitalize on for 2024, especially after Joe Biden in 2020 provided the roadmap for how Democrats can win the state of Georgia at the presidential level, winning it by 0.24%. And again, as I mentioned, this is where that whole situation with President Trump, Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, and Geoff Duncan all came to unfold. Biden here got 2,473,633 votes. Trump got 2,461,854 votes. This was roughly about 12,000 votes separating Biden and Trump in 2020 in the state of Georgia. If the Democrats are going to win this state in 2026, they have to try and replicate the map that Joe Biden did in 2020 and Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were able to do in 2020 and 2022, respectively. It gives the Democrats a very clear way and very clear margins to line out on how things go. Georgia does have an interesting rule where the candidate who wins has to break 50% of the vote at the governor and Senate level. On the first round of voting, Raphael Warnock didn't actually break 50%, so it did go to a runoff. But at 49.44%, it showed he was the leader going into that election runoff. The Democrats likely to win this election. They could probably win without a runoff in 2026, but to win the governor's race, they would probably need to go to a runoff election to win. That, in my view, would be the best case for the Democrats at trying to do that. As at the governor level, the Republicans probably have a slight advantage in this race. The most recent election prediction I have for the governor's maps and my most recent prediction, I did give the state of Georgia to the Republicans, making it lean Republican. I think it's going to be by around 1.5% to 2%. Again, I do think it's possible it may take a runoff election for that to happen. But I did have Chris Carr winning this race by a lean Republican margin. But I would not be shocked come election day to see the Democrats nearly flip Georgia. I think this would be this would be indicative of a larger Democratic wave, more on par with what we saw in 2018 than what we saw in 2022 if this were to happen, as this would be the Democrats not having a very good election night by like 2 or 3% nationally. I think this would be Democrats having a very good election night by like 7 or 8% nationally if Georgia were to go blue. But Democrats could certainly win the state of Georgia and are certainly trying to win the state at the governor level, as well as defending their Senate seat that's up as well. But I do think the Republicans are favored to hold on to Georgia right now. But the prospect of Geoff Duncan running, I don't think it ultimately happens where he becomes a Democratic nominee. But it's a very interesting conversation, for instance, in the Democratic debates maybe, at points he may raise in campaigning that Democrats may try and use against the Republicans in the general election. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this and other videos you'd like to see me cover. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video.